Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Lover Girl. I'm so excited you could join me once again. In my last episode, I was talking about how I was down bad about my situationship. I knew I had to get over these thoughts and feelings, and the summer was coming to an end. I thought I would hop on a dating app and have one last fling to close out my summer. So usually when I go on these dating apps, it's really more of an ego boost. I don't usually meet anyone in person, but if I do, which happens on a very rare occasion, good for me and good for them. So this one weekend, I was feeling really down about Jacob. So I thought that maybe meeting someone new would take my mind off of this. I signed up for Tinder and instantly I meet someone, and this man is a police officer. So he and I are having a good conversation. However, I'm still on the app and I'm swiping through. Then I come across a photo of this man in a suit. He looks very professional, put together very well, beautiful face, gorgeous eyes. He has dark hair, darker complexion, and I'm thinking he's not really my type. I appreciate a good-looking person. However, the person I'm dating doesn't need to look perfect. And I'm swiping through his photos thinking, not really my type, but I swipe right anyway. Instantly, we matched, which wasn't that big of a deal, but right away he sends me a message and says, thanks for the like. So of course I thank him back. From there, we started having a conversation. He asked me what my ethnicity was, and he said that he liked it. It was cute of him to say because I hadn't even told him what my ethnicity was. So I end up telling him, but then he explains to me what his ethnicity is, saying that he's half white and half Polynesian, which was interesting because that's exactly what my ex-boyfriend was. So our conversation is going really well, and then he asks me if I have another form of contact, such as Instagram, Snapchat, or a phone number. So I'm thinking really heavily on what form of contact I'm going to offer him, and then I end up giving him my Instagram. And after giving him that, I see that he didn't respond, so I'm thinking maybe he checked my Instagram and didn't want to respond to me anymore. So maybe about 15 minutes later, I give him my burner number, which is a number I got from Google Voice, and that's basically a processed number that reaches your actual phone. And this is the same number that I had given the police officer, telling him this is not my real number, but listen, I'm a single woman, I need to set my boundaries, and I can't just be giving out my real number to people I don't know, which he understood. The next day I get a message from this suit guy, his name is James, and we're having a conversation through text while I'm at work. So I have this trip coming up back to my hometown. I'm flirting with him, saying, you should come with me. And he starts to sound really excited about it. And this man is actually looking up flights to see how much it would be to come with me. During our conversation, he mentions how he had traveled to where I'm going with his ex, how he had surprised her with this trip, and then they ended up breaking up 2 months later. Now, with a previous conversation that I had with a friend, talking about an ex should be a red flag. I don't want to know. I don't give a fuck about your ex. I don't want to think about you with another woman. Anyway, another part of me is like, I don't want to focus too heavily on red flags. Everyone has their own issues, and I didn't feel like judging him on whatever was going on in his life because nobody's perfect. So that night, I'm just at home creating content. Then I get a text message from the police officer. In his message, he says, I'm on my way to go drive by your house. Did you get something to eat? And I'm like thinking, what the fuck are you saying? So I message him back and ask, you know where I live? Then he tells me the city I live in, which was fine because I had told him that. But at this point, sirens are going off in my head because he's a police officer. I don't know what type of information he has or can retrieve. He ends up calling me, but I don't want to answer. I really don't care for what he has to say. So he sends me a text and says, that's what I get for using my voice to type a text and not proofreading. But at this point, I was turned off and I really didn't care to talk to him anymore. In the same evening, I'm also communicating with James through text. We're actually connecting very well, talking about our interests and the things that we like to do and the places we like to go. So this man lives about 20 miles away from me, and he says that he wants to make an effort to come out and see me. He expressed to me how he was willing to drive my way, so I told him that if he did, I'd appreciate it. He responds to that by saying, for you I will and want to. So this man is saying all of the right things, and I think he's just so sweet to me. And on top of that, he's very good looking. So I was definitely excited about that. The next day, he hadn't contacted me as he did the day prior, but I was trying not to think too heavily on it. Evening came and he still hadn't contacted me, but I told myself that I wasn't going to contact him and seem too desperate or clingy, so I just left it as it was. He ended up sending me a text at about 9 p.m. telling me that he had just seen my Instagram story with a fire emoji. At this point, I was beginning to get a liking towards him, so I decided to confess that I had actually given him a burner number instead of my real number. He asked me if I was real or fake, and I told him that was a valid question. So I decided to send him a selfie from my real phone number, which he seemed to be satisfied with, and he tells me that he's still considering making that trip out with me back to my hometown. He continues to ask me when he can see me, and that he would love to get some drinks with me, laugh with me, and get to know me better. Then tells me how insanely attracted he is to me, and I told him that the feeling was mutual. So he suggested that we meet up the next day, and I said sure. Then he immediately switches up and says, or not. I wondered why he would change his mind so quickly. Then he mentions to me that he's just not sure what days and times would work best for me. He then suggested that he reach out on FaceTime for a quick call because it was getting late. When I picked up, he told me that he was surprised that I actually answered. So we started up our conversation and we began talking about where we lived. He had mentioned to me where he currently lives, then mentioned where he used to live prior to that. He mentioned how he had purchased a home with his ex-girlfriend and began talking about that city where his previous home was in. While he's saying this, I'm getting text messages, which I'm responding to. And within this call, he can see that I'm not giving him my 100% attention. Then he starts talking smack about the city that I live in, saying that it's ghetto and there's people shooting at cops and it's probably my apartment complex where that happened. And I'm like thinking, what is your problem? So I'm trying to read his facial expressions and he seems so serious. He's giving off a completely different vibe from how he communicated through text messages. Within his text, he seemed like he was fun, lively, and easygoing. But in this call, he's not happy that I'm not giving him my entire attention. So I say to him, I'm getting back to these people texting me. And he says, is it all those other guys texting you? And I say to him, no, they're my friends. And then he goes, is that what you call them? And I'm thinking, what is this guy's problem? I say to him, well, this is the second or third time you mentioned your ex-girlfriend. He tries to back up his words, saying that he really liked that city and it was an up-and-coming town. But at this point, he's clearly annoyed with me and I'm starting to get an off feeling. I'm ready to hang up the call and never speak to him again. But I told myself that I wasn't going to do that and that I was going to push through. So I decided to ask him more questions, like, are you annoyed with me because you felt like I wasn't giving you my attention? And he said that could have been a factor. But I am pretty sarcastic and not everyone understands that. So I said, okay, that's fine. But I expressed to him that I was paying attention to him. We got over that hurdle and I noticed that he began opening up to me more. So I decided to give him my full attention if he was going to be willing to communicate with me. So our communication got better and then he asked me why I had moved to this town. Whenever people I'm getting to know ask me this question, it's really difficult for me to express this and talk about my previous relationships because it is really heavy. There's just so much that goes into it. I also didn't want to pour all of those emotions on him because this man barely knew me. So I tried to consolidate the information as much as possible to give him a decent answer. But at the same time, I was beginning to like him, so I wanted to be as open and honest as I would allow myself to be. The more that we share more about ourselves, I am finding myself to be more comfortable with him. So I do start opening up about my relationships and even mention my kids, which I hardly ever do. When I do mention my kids, he says, so you have 2 kids with 2 different guys. And when he's saying this, I feel so small. The reason for this is because in the past, I had been made to feel bad about my situation, where people would make me want to feel like less than a human being for having children with more than one person, where I'm not in a relationship with any of them. And those people consisted of my ex-boyfriend and my own daughter's dad. But I look at him and he is just looking at me with the most adoring eyes, like he is so mesmerized by me. Then he smiles at me and says, it's okay. You pushed through and you made it and now you're here. And I thought that was such a great response to what I had expressed to him. In this call, he's also sharing a lot about himself. I learned that he takes really good care of himself and he is very aware of how he looks and how he presents himself. He tells me how his teeth are so white because he doesn't drink coffee coffee. He doesn't drink energy drinks. So I say to him, where do you get your energy from if you don't drink coffee? He points to the side of his head and says, it's all in here, meaning it's all in your mindset. And I was very impressed. I liked the way he thought, and I felt like we were on the same wavelength intellectually. I then asked him if he typically dated older women, and he told me that he prefers older women because they're a lot more mature and they have their shit together. Then I asked if he wanted kids. He told me he did want kids. He wanted 2 of them, and he sounded certain of this. So I said, you prefer to date older women, but you want kids? He says to me, you know, the biological clock isn't as big of a deal as people make it out to be. And I thought about it and I agreed with that. Then he proceeds to say, but if it isn't an option to have kids, then I'd have to reevaluate my situation. But if I don't have kids, I'd have complete freedom to do whatever I want to do. So when we're discussing this, I'm thinking, this man is single, he's very good looking, he's in his early 30s, has his entire life ahead of him, and here I am, 4 years older than he is. I've lived so much more life than he has. I've experienced a lot of the things that he wants to experience. I've been married, I've been in long-term relationships, I have children. It really isn't my time to be starting over. So in my I Love My Situationship episode, I talked about Jacob, but I don't believe I mentioned that he's a Taurus, which is what James is as well. And one thing about Tauruses is that they're very confident people. They're very sure of themselves. So while James was talking about himself, he talked about all of the things that he did for his ex-girlfriend, like how he used to cook and clean and take care of the dog. Then says to me, I would make for a great husband. And when he said this, I couldn't help but laugh because I'm thinking, how do you know that you would make for a great husband? Have you been married before? Because it takes so much more than housework to make for a great spouse. Yet at the same time, I did admire his confidence. Then he began talking about the scars on his body. That's when he lifted his wrist and told me about the scratches on his forearm. And that's when he disclosed to me how abusive of a person his ex-girlfriend was. So when he had added me on Instagram, I noticed that he kept a couple of pictures up of him and his ex-girlfriend. So when you look at these pictures of them, it looks like they're a nice, attractive couple. You wouldn't think that she's insecure and has the capability of putting her hands on him. It just didn't seem that way. So I was very shocked with what he was telling me. And at this point, I was feeling really bad for him. So I say to him, I'm so sorry you had to experience that. And he's laying in bed in the dark and he says to me, she just wasn't the one for me. So it's 1 a.m. and he tells me, I feel like I can talk to you forever, but it's getting late. So we decide to end the call. I didn't end up going to sleep for 2 hours after that conversation. I was thinking about him a lot and I was starting to really like him. The next day, he texts me after work asking if I want to hang out. And we end up going to a bar, which is also a restaurant, about 10 minutes away from my home. I get there first and I'm waiting for him at the door. And shortly after, I see him walking up to me, and he is as gorgeous as he is in the photos, with his hair done nicely and his beautiful brown eyes. He was wearing a button down and dress pants, so it was clear that he had just come from work. We sat down at a round table, sitting on 2 bar stools, and we're sitting right next to one another. I noticed that he isn't projecting his voice loud enough for me to hear, which was interesting because that's typically my issue. Even though I'm on a date with this beautiful man, I don't feel nervous at all. I feel like I have the capability to be myself, and I was feeling pretty comfortable. So we start talking about our interests, and he tells me how he loves to cook, showing me photos of some of the dishes that he's made. We also talk about music because he had mentioned to me how he had also gone to the Morgan Wallen concert, and Morgan Wallen is actually one of my favorite artists. So to have that in common was pretty exciting. I'm really having so much fun talking to him. The way that he spoke about things, he seemed very knowledgeable in what he was talking about. He was speaking on this topic where I'm really engaged. And at the end of it, he says, I saw it in a meme. I died inside. I thought he was so funny. He begins telling me about his diversified family, how he doesn't just have 2 parents, he has 4 because both of his parents remarried. And then he begins to tell me how he was the type of guy who was like, I always told myself that I would never date someone who has kids. But the way that I grew up, I was really fortunate to have my step-parents because they did all of these things for me. I'm so grateful for that. So who am I to say that I shouldn't be dating someone who has kids? I thought that that was such a great mindset. But at the same time, I understood where he was coming from. And I disclosed to him that I typically dated people who didn't have kids. So I mentioned this to him and he's like, so then I have a chance. I was happy. I was having a great time with him. I noticed that we had been there for a while. I'm like, we should get out of here. So he got the bill and he's like, let's go hang out at some other place. And I said, okay, you can figure it out. So I went to use the restroom and I got back and he's looking at his phone like he's really trying to find another place for us to hang out. He asks me what I had planned for the weekend because it was a Thursday and I mentioned to him that I didn't have any plans. So he says he should hang out with me. When he says this, I look at him and smile. And then he goes, or not. I noticed that he did this often where if he felt unsure, he would change his mind. And I noticed that his projection began to withdraw. And I thought for a second he said, I'll just hang out with someone else. So when he had said this, I was a bit triggered because of what Jacob had said to me when he thought that I told him I didn't want him anymore. So I looked at him and I said, don't say that to me, take it back. So he says, then we can hang out together. But if you don't want to hang out with me, I'll just hang out with my friends. Hearing him say that felt so much better because I didn't want him to be like, there's other people if you don't want to hang out with me, as in other women. That's just not something I wanted to hear. I mean, it wasn't my place to feel a certain type of way if he were to date other people. However, it's just not something I wanted to hear. So by him rephrasing it, I did feel a lot better. And I like the fact that he knew how to put words in ways to make me feel more comfortable and that he wasn't purposely trying to make me feel bad. So he wants to continue the night and he doesn't want to end it just yet. So we find another bar maybe a mile away. We get to the second bar and here he is waiting for me outside of my car. And he is just at this point the most intimate I've ever laid my eyes on. How quickly things change just by sharing moments with them and having good conversation and connecting with people. By sharing those moments, you do see people in a different way. So we get to the bar and he recognizes the bartender and starts having a conversation with her. I'm looking at her and I'm trying to be nice because I don't know how close they are. I don't know how well he knows her. So I want to be nice to people he knows and I'm not just gonna like get jealous right off the bat just because he's speaking to another woman in front of me. Obviously, that would be annoying, but I wasn't going to be bothered by this. That bar was definitely a more chill environment. It wasn't as lively as previous place. So we're just sitting at the bar and I am getting a buzz. When I'm drinking and I'm just sitting around being stagnant, I do get tired. So we're continuing our conversation and my body is moved towards his direction. If we're on a date, we should be connecting and getting to know each other. I did not understand the concept of bringing up other people, talking about other people, and trying to have conversations with other people. During our time at this place, I felt the energy shift. It wasn't as flirty as it was at the first place, and I feel like he was feeling that too. So what I'm hoping from this man is that he would really engage with me and bring his body closer to mine and look intently into my eyes and just flirt with me. But he's not doing that. We're just talking about the same things and yeah, getting to know each other. I mean, I guess that's what a date is supposed to be like. However, I want more of a connection. So I think he senses it for me too. He's like, when you finish your beer, we can head out of here. And I'm like thinking, I feel like you don't want to hang out with me. And then he offers to finish my beer. It felt as though he couldn't get out of there fast enough. And I wasn't feeling as excited as I was previously. So we're both heading to our vehicles and my vehicle comes first. And I know exactly how I'm behaving as if I'm displeased. And I didn't care if I showed it. It's just how I am. So I'm trying to open my door and he says, are you going to give me a hug? And I look at him with a sly look, like, can we be more awkward? Which is how I'm looking at him. But then I decide to give him a hug and he says, it's getting cold. And I agree with him. him and say, yeah, it is getting cold. Then he says, why don't we sit in my car? I have heated seats. So I said, okay. We walk over to his BMW and I sit in his passenger seat. So we're just talking about what we have planned for the evening. And he says how he's going to go home to his hot tub. And he says how he wishes that he could spend more time with me. He says, I just feel like I can talk to you for hours. And you can't find a connection like this with just anyone. I completely agreed. So we can just go somewhere and get drinks and talk. And I said, and what else do you want to do? He says, no, it's not like that. We don't need to do anything else. I just feel like I can talk to you for hours. At this point, we're definitely flirting the way I wanted us to. And then he leans over to me and he puts his hand on my cheek. His face is moving closer to mine. And I can see his full lips so close to my face. And then he says, can I? I am absolutely down for a kiss. So we start kissing and then he says to me, you're a really good kisser. And I told him, thanks, so are you. So he pulls away and then we smile. We kiss again. I am so into it and my hands are on his face, his shoulders, the back of his neck, the back of his head. Just my hands are all over the place. And we are full on making out. We're really enjoying this. So while we had been kissing, I noticed that his hands are all over me too. And he places his hand right between my thigh. So it's getting to a point where he does want to take it to that level. However, we're in his car right now and absolutely nothing is going to happen in the parking lot. And the car that had been parked right next to us starts moving. And I said, oh my goodness, do you think that person saw us making out? No, the tints on my windows are pretty dark. So I said, okay, I should probably go. And he's like, yeah, okay, I should get going too. I thank him for the night and I open the door to head out and my phone dings and he said, you should probably get that. I ignored the comments. I headed out and I had the biggest smile on my face. That was a really good makeout session. I felt really good about the entire thing. So I get to my car. It was my girlfriend who texted me. She told me she just got off of work and suggested that we meet. So I was excited to tell her about this date. So we end up meeting. We're having fun at the bar. We're meeting different people. And there's this young woman who is standing by my stool where my purse is. And I firmly say to her, excuse me. She had been singing karaoke that night. And we're telling her how great she was. And she starts talking to us, telling us what she does for a living. And she seems really sweet. So we're talking and I pull out a lip gloss from my clutch and I start applying it to my lips. And she says to me, you're really teasing me right now. So I look at her and I say, are you into girls? And she goes, yeah, actually I am. So I give her my lip gloss. I say, here, have some if you want it. So she takes it from me. And I say to her, I'm sorry, I'm strictly dickly. So she hands it back to me and she says, okay, I'm just going to give this back to you then. But this girl, she is probably 13 years younger than me. And she was totally trying to flirt with me. Like, okay, so I guess men and women are attracted to me. I look at my phone and it had been a couple of hours since my date with James had ended. And I see that he had texted me and he asked if I got home okay. I left it on red and didn't want to explain to him that I had gone out after our date. So I just left it at that. And I ended up going home shortly after. So I got home about 30 minutes after he had texted me. And I finally responded to him and I said, I can't wait to see you tomorrow. So again, he asked if I got home safe. And I told him yes and explained to him that I had went out with a friend afterward. So at this point I was pretty inebriated and I texted him that I met a girl and explained to him how she had been flirting with me when I was applying my lip gloss. Then apologized how I just disclosed too much information when I'm drinking. And that's when he told me he wished he would have been able to drink with me a little more, but he did have a long drive home. Then I just continue on telling him how I thought he was handsome and that I liked him a lot, but not in a superficial way. I just felt that he was interesting to me. And then he texted me back saying likewise. with a heart emoji. We start discussing our makeout session. He mentions that he was fantasizing about me on his drive home. Right before I go to bed, I decide to send him a flirty picture, which he hearted on iMessage. Then this man asked me, "What's your Snapchat?" At this point, I had been drinking, but I was like, what the fuck? So I told him I don't have Snapchat. I was pretty annoyed. So I said to him, please delete that, meaning the photo that I had sent him. And it wasn't anything too revealing. It was just me in my bodysuit. So he liked the message where I told him to delete it. And I was feeling really off about him asking me about my Snapchat. So I messaged him and I said, FaceTime me. And he didn't answer. So with me drinking and then feeling this way and being annoyed about what he had said, my overthinking went on overdrive. And the fact that he did not answer or FaceTime me, I couldn't tell you where my mind was at. So the next morning before work, he texted me and said that he put his phone on silent, then fell asleep. So that day, we did not communicate much throughout the entire day. And also, I had not been feeling too great. I couldn't tell what it was, but my stomach had been bothering me. I don't know if it had been something I ate or if I was just feeling anxious. So at this point, it must have been because I was feeling confused about this person. I was starting to like him very much, and I really didn't want it to be like another failure. However, I didn't want to think too heavy on it as well. That evening, I'm laying in bed and I decide to delete Tinder because there's really nothing there for me. And since I had started talking to James, I really didn't care to talk to anyone else on that app. So I was on Instagram and I was in the process of deactivating it, which I do often. Sometimes I just need a mental break from social media. So I do this quite a lot. At this point, I don't know what I had done differently, but I was just clicking on buttons to go through the process. And at one point, I did see the word deletion. I continued clicking and somehow, I don't know what I had just done, but I had deleted my account. And I was so confused. Like, wouldn't it prompt me maybe a second time or a final time to let me know that my account was being permanently deleted? So I tried to log back in again, but it wouldn't allow me. There was an error. And I just laid there trying to accept the fact that my entire Instagram had been deleted. So at this point, it's around 10 p.m. I sent him an inviting text saying that we should hang out that weekend and that I would love to see him, but I wasn't feeling well. So he asked if I had been feeling hungover from the previous night. But then I realized that when he and I were on our date, I did have nachos, and that was actually the only thing that I had eaten within a 40-hour time frame, and that could have been what was affecting my stomach. So I decided to send him a flirty text saying that I just needed his hot body to warm me up, and he agreed, saying that it would definitely help. So with that text exchange, I had been feeling better and I was able to fall asleep nicely. Then in the morning, he texted me and asked me if I still needed him to come over. And I said, of course I do. He asked if I had any plans for the evening and I told him that I was hanging out with him. So we're asking each other questions on what we're up to, also trying to plan out our day. And then he pops a question asking why I deleted him from Instagram and Tinder. So I explained to him that I deleted Tinder, I deactivated Instagram, but somehow I accidentally deleted it. And I apologized, hoping that didn't offend him. Then he tells me that it just seemed odd, but said it was just a misunderstanding. So during the time that we're planning, I'm just trying to flirt with him and trying to sound exciting and adventurous. So I mentioned we should go into the city and get a hotel and get drunk all night because it's the weekend and the summer's almost over. So when would be another time for me to have this much fun? However, with these plans, he sounds a bit more hesitant and even mentions that it's a big commitment. I couldn't tell if he was being sarcastic or if he was being serious, but he did not sound as spontaneous as I was feeling, which was interesting because he had been looking up flights ready to spend $800 to go on a trip with me to my hometown. I did not understand that at all. all. Anyway, throughout the day, we're both taking about 2 hours to respond to each other's texts. During this time, I'm thinking it's getting late. We probably aren't gonna get a hotel room in the city. So I'm thinking maybe I'll just invite him over, then I'll get ready and we can go out to dinner or something. And I'm thinking I am not ready to have someone over. So during the time that we're texting, I head over to Target and I get a bunch of cleaning supplies. So I tell this man that I'm feeling pretty exhausted and he can just meet me at my place and I'd have more energy later on in the evening. So I sent him my address, thinking maybe he'll contact me, maybe he'll just head over, something, right? But he doesn't respond to me. Anyway, I am just cleaning my entire place. And while I'm cleaning, I'm thinking, why isn't he contacting me? Why didn't he respond to my text? So my cleaning binge is dwindling down and I'm still wondering, like, why haven't I heard from him? Right before 8 p.m., I text him and ask if he still wanted to meet up. And he said yes and asked if I got some rest. So I told him I did and that I got a bunch of things done and I told him to come over. It took him about 30 minutes to get ready and 30 minutes to get to my place. So he called me and I meet him outside in my flip-flops and this man is walking towards me and I didn't realize how tall he was while I'm in flats. I looked up at him and was so mesmerized. Wow, you're so tall. I was standing right underneath his underarms. He was just towering over me. So we're heading into my apartment. We walk in and he hugs me. Before he leans in for a kiss, he says, "Are you glad I came over?" And I had the biggest grin on my face and I said, "Yeah." Then he leans in to kiss me. So we're trying to figure out a place to have dinner. A lot of places are closing at this point. It's pretty late at night. So he's on his phone scrolling, trying to figure out a place, saying that he's not really impressed with any of the places around my home. So I finally get ready and I head out into the dining room and he's sitting on the couch saying that he found a place for us to eat. And then he walks towards me. He starts kissing me again. And this tall man lifts me up so easily. While he's holding me, we're making out. And this man is just handling me so gently. And I can feel him placing me down on my couch while he continues to kiss me. I don't remember feeling this comfortable on my couch ever. So I open my eyes and I'm wondering how he had placed me. And I look up at him and he smiles at me and says, "Okay, let's go have dinner." So we head out the door and we're walking down the hall and I feel really comfortable and confident walking right beside him. And then he grabs my hand, cuffing it. And again, I felt like a little girl. I reverted back to the time that I was with Charlie, the drummer, who was in my Zodiac compatibility episode. So I absolutely love this feeling because I feel like the man holding my hand is the more dominant person who is the provider, who is taking care of me. And from that, I feel like I'm being taken care of. And that's a feeling that I like. So throughout my life, I did have to be this strong, hard person. But deep down, I am a real feminine. So this really warms my heart to feel like I'm being taken care of. So the conversations that we had were pretty interesting, but I felt like I was learning a lot about him. And then he places his hand on my thigh and he says, "I like how this is soft." And I smiled at him because how predictable is it for these Taurus men to do the same things, to say the same words, to act the same way? The predictability was good for me, knowing how they would act. But at the same time, I know how difficult they could be, and I know how this could end. But that second part, I was not thinking about it. I was just really happy that he was enjoying himself with me. So he ends up taking me to this restaurant, which was very nice. I love the atmosphere, the low lighting. We were seated right next to the big windows, and it was just perfect. When I was seated in front of him, these thoughts were running through my mind thinking, what if this is awkward? What if we have nothing to say? What if I don't know what to say? In the beginning of this date, I have to admit, I was feeling nervous. So I mentioned to him how it had not even been a week since we first matched on Tinder. And then he says, "Yeah, but it feels like we've known each other for forever." And I looked at him very surprised about that. that, wondering to myself if that's actually how he was really feeling. But I was excited about that response. And then we started talking about my upcoming trip and how he's really excited for me. And again, he's looking at his phone, telling me this was the third time he was going to look at prices. I mentioned to him how he is completely down to take this extravagant trip with me, but going up to the city and getting a hotel room is a big commitment. We laughed about it. Then he looked at his calendar and said, you know what, that would actually be conflicting to my schedule because I actually need to head out on a work trip the very same day you come back. So our conversations are going pretty smoothly. I notice that he is starting to open up again. He says to me, I'm sorry to bring this up. And he begins talking about his ex again. I swallow hard after he says this, thinking, if you have to apologize for talking about your ex and then continue talking about them, why would you do that? He begins ranting about her once again, about the abuse, about the immature behavior, about her life, about her family, how she grew up, their decision to do therapy. And I'm like sitting there taking all of this in. What is the point in this? Why do I need to know this information? And I wanted him to be open with me, be comfortable in telling me what he wanted to say, what was on his mind, how he was feeling, given it was pretty early to be disclosing this information, but I was taking it all in. He decides to end it and says, but yeah, you like hearing what I have to say, and that's what I have to say about that. And once he was done, I felt drained. It was a lot of information. It was a very heavy topic. All I could say was, I don't have any advice for you. I don't know how to make it better. All I have to say is, I'm sorry you went through that. And he says, oh no, I don't need any of that. I just needed to get that off of my chest. So we're ending our dinner and he suggests that we go to another bar to have a drink. We decide to go to that bar restaurant that we went to on our first date because it was just a few blocks away. So we head out of the restaurant and I'm feeling very confident about myself, about us, about the situation. We head into his car and we're driving over to the next place and he is holding onto my hand while he is driving and I just feel so great. I feel like a very sophisticated woman sitting next to a very sophisticated man in his beautiful car. I'm feeling really good about the situation. So we walk in and we find a seat at the bar. I get my usual drink and I feel really excited. I'm at one of my favorite places and I'm sitting next to my gorgeous date, which is probably one of the most handsome men in there. Well, in my eyes, anyway. And the atmosphere is really loud. There's so many people, but we're sitting very closely to one another and I'm leaning in while we're having a conversation. And I have the biggest smile on my face while I have my arm wrapped around his with my chin on his shoulder, looking at him, just gazing at his beautiful face. So these different songs come on and he can tell me the title of a song and the year it came out. And I'm telling him, wow, you have such a great memory. And he explains to me how he takes these songs and he connects it with different moments in his life. And that's how he can remember them. And this is another connection that I felt with him because I am the same way where I don't necessarily remember the title of a song and the year it came out, but with these different songs, I do connect them with my own memories. It was another thing that I liked about him. So we were watching sports and the Olympics were on and he was telling me how he had been watching a particular sporting event going on and that's why he had been wearing the jersey. So he felt like that was another connection that we had as well because I do enjoy sporting events and cheering for our home team. Then we start talking about real estate and he mentions how he'd love to build his portfolio and he mentions his goals and his income. And he tells me how he strives to be a millionaire by the time he's 40. I told him, you can definitely do that. And then he says, are you going to get there with me? I said, no, I'm going to encourage you to get there and you'll be able to do it on your own. He said, I like that. And the reason I said this is because I could tell that he was a very driven, very motivated person. Whatever he had worked for to get this far was all of his doing, and it had nothing to do with me. So it really would not have been my place to have any of that glory. But knowing me, I could have his back and help him get motivated and stay motivated and encourage him to do great things because I knew he had that potential. Right next to me, I see this man who I had met a year prior at the same place. And I'm explaining this to James, how this man used to be married to one of my best friend's best friend, and he was hitting on me. So my best friend, who I was with that night, went and told her best friend this man was hitting on me. I'm explaining this to him, and he looks at him and says, I guess it's time for us to leave then. And I'm wondering, why? Why is it time for us to leave? And he looks at the clock and he says, it's almost 12. There's nothing good that happens after 12. I'm thinking, I don't think that's true. And I say, don't you mean 2 a.m.? And he goes, no, that's way too late. But I was perfectly fine with leaving. He mentions how us meeting later in the evening was perfect timing because we had a late dinner and we had a late drink and we didn't need to spend too much money. So I mentioned to him, we don't need to spend a lot of money on dates to spend time together and get to know each other. And he's like, that's easier said than done. But in my head, I'm thinking, I am a really frugal person, and it's clear that he is too. So I'm sure I'd be able to find really cheap and inexpensive dates, if not free. That was another thing I thought we matched well in, our frugality. So we head out of the bar, we're walking to his vehicle, and again, he cuffs my hand. I feel so great about our date and the person I'm with. So we get in his car and he's taking me back to my place. I remember looking out the window, simply enjoying the moment. And then he asks me, are you okay? I look at him and smile and I say, yeah. And then he takes my hand, brings it to his face, and kisses the back of my hand. I remember just wanting to freeze that moment with that view of him. During our drive home, he had one hand on the steering wheel and the other holding my hand. I was explaining to him how I had met all of these different people within the year and I hadn't even kissed anyone, which was a lie. I did kiss one other person, but those words just came out of my mouth and I didn't feel like taking it back. And he looks at me and says, well, I hope you think I'm special. I looked back and told him, you are special. So at that point, I felt like we were having a really good moment where we were connecting and I was feeling very good about us. So we're really close to my home and he asked me what I had planned and I told him that I was just going to go to bed. And he asked, is that it? I asked him, did you want to come inside? And he's like, yeah, I can hang out for a bit. So I said, no, you should head back because you have to go to the gym in the morning, which is what he mentioned to me at the bar. Then he responded with, so you're telling me what I need to do? But I didn't want to be the reason for him to not do something that he had already planned. He mentioned that we could just stay in and talk some more and listen to music. And that sounded like a great idea to me. We get into my apartment and we're both complaining about how hot it was. So I decide to change into some sleeping clothes and I asked him if we should watch some Netflix on my projector. He's like, oh yeah, that sounds great. I turn it on and I shut off the lights and this man lifts me up and he goes in for a kiss. So at this point, we're heavily making out and he carries me towards my bed and he lays me down. Things start getting hot and heavy. I'm wearing a dress and he is on top of me, kissing me and stripping down to his underwear. It had been a year since I had been intimate with Jacob. That was the last person that I was with. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was really enjoying it. He thinks the hot and heavy makeout session was his invite to get inside of me. And the next thing I knew, we were having sex. I couldn't take it back. We had already started. I felt like I really liked this person. So I didn't try to stop it. I just allowed it to continue on. And in the beginning, it felt nice, but it must have been because I had not had sex in an entire year. In the duration of us having sex, he is talking a lot. He is even asking me how long it had been since the last time I had done it. And I hesitated to give him an answer, but he continued to ask me about it. So I told him that it had been a year. And then he mentions how he wants to finish inside of me and tells me that I should take a plan B. And again, this is all while we're having sex. But he ends up not doing so, and we finish. So when we're laying there discussing what had just happened, I told him that I wasn't worried about getting pregnant because I have an abnormal period. I don't get pregnant easily. And he says to me, "Do you still ovulate?" I told him I wasn't sure. So he asked, "Do you not know your own body?" If I'm not getting my period regularly, I'm not going to question it because having my period is not something I enjoy. So once I said this, he decided, okay, if we do it again, I'm not going to ejaculate as much and you don't get pregnant easily. So we did it a second time. And the second time that we did it, I noticed that a part of me is faking it. And a part of me was thinking about Jacob and thinking about how it didn't feel as great as it did when I was with Jacob. And the only part that I'm enjoying is the fact that I hadn't had sex in a long time and I was finally having sex. I think that was the only part that I was enjoying. So when he's done, I clean myself off and he is just making himself comfortable on my bed and we have the projector going. I ask him what he wants to watch. Selling Sunset was on the screen. He says to me, "Let's watch that." I wasn't really interested in watching it, but he had already chose for us, so I didn't want to waste my time scrolling through all of the movies. Once it starts playing, he mentions how his ex used to watch that show in the Kardashians, and he noticed that there's so much drama within these reality shows that she began speaking like them and starting drama the way that they do. And I thought, oh my gosh, here we go again with him talking about his ex. And I turn to him while he's laying in my bed, and I'm sitting really close to him while he begins talking about her and complaining about all of the things that she did and wondering why she behaved the way that she did. While I'm listening to him, I notice that I am not the only person that he has discussed this with, and it sounds like other people have chimed into his relationship with her and her behavior. It seemed like he was just racking his brain on why someone would behave in such a way. Then I looked at him and I said, sometimes two people don't go well together. And he said to me, "You're right. You're so right about that. It's basically common sense." And by the sound of it, it sounded like he wanted to change her so bad and wanted her to be a particular way. And he just couldn't understand why she couldn't be that way for him. Yes, it was starting to annoy me because he was in my bed talking about another woman and I knew way too much about her. And the fact that I had just broken my 1 year streak of being celibate, and then for this man who I was just intimate with be talking about another woman in my bed, it was giving me not so great feelings. I laid next to him and I said, "I feel like you're really in your head about this and you're letting it get to you." His demeanor changed into more of a stoic attitude. He said, "My life has always been pretty steady and I'm fine right now." And then says that he should just be grateful and not complain about a bad relationship that he had, which is now over. So after he had said that, we lay there peacefully in my bed and I asked if he was staying over. Then he questioned if I was kicking him out and I told him I wasn't. I could rest. So we both get comfortable in my bed and then he decides to forewarn me, saying that he doesn't snore in his sleep, but he does fidget when he's about to go to sleep. And I ask him, "How do you know that you don't snore if you're sleeping? How would you know that?" And in the most matter-of-fact way he could tell me, he said, "I was sleeping with someone for 3 years. I don't snore." Again, he mentions her. And listen, every time a man mentions another woman or their ex or whatever it may be, what we women do is we imagine the two of them together. So this is the picture I had in my head before I went to bed of them sleeping together. And then her saying, "You don't even snore in your sleep." Oh my God. Was that necessary? No, it wasn't. But here I am, fully aware that I snore. I was very self-conscious about this. I wanted him to fall asleep and I wanted to see if he didn't snore, and he didn't. There was absolutely nothing coming from him. And I ended up holding him while he had his back turned towards me and I rested my face on his back. I did have little bits of sleep, but I would wake up with my mouth open, letting out these snores while my face was on his back. I don't know if he heard me, and I don't know if he was really sleeping, but I did keep waking up from that, so I thought that I would turn the opposite direction, and maybe if I was in a more comfortable way, I wouldn't snore. But that was definitely keeping me up, and I just could not sleep. He ended up staying until the morning, and we woke up at about 8. So I asked him if he needed anything before he left. He said that he didn't, and then asked me if I needed anything. I flirted with him a little, saying that I did need something before he left. He responded with, "I know you do." So once he gets up, we start going at it again. At this point, I'm sober. It's morning time. The light is out, and I'm wide awake. I'm thinking, yeah, I've had better sex than this. He gets up and I'm laying in bed and he says, "Come with me." I smile. I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to leave the bed. I said, "Where are we going?" "Let's go to the couch." So he takes my hand and he's walking me into my living room. We go to the couch and I'm on top of him. I didn't realize it, but I had been scratching him. And he says to me, "Don't scratch me," in such a calm way. I told him I couldn't help myself. And he says, "Just hold on to the couch," with zero emotion, just basically telling me what to do. So I did. And then we switched positions where he was behind me. I was not enjoying it. I really wanted to stop. I think he knew that there was no enjoyment happening there. So I turned around and he said, "I'm not going to be able to finish." I said, "That's okay." He asked if it felt good. And I lied and said yes. Then I kissed him. We were cleaning ourselves off and he was getting ready to leave. And I am very intuitive when it comes to other people's emotions. I could see the look on his face. Like he wasn't happy or excited. But at the same time, we both had just woken up and we were tired from the previous night. I always have like really good energy, especially when I'm happy. So I stood on my bed and I kissed him and I gave him a hug. But he had this look on his face like he did not seem excited at all. But it didn't bother me. So on his way out, I looked at him and I said, "Thanks for taking me out last night." Then he said, "Of course." That's when we kissed and he headed out the door. So after he had left, I was laying in my bed. I remember staring at my blinds, thinking how I had ended my 1-year streak with someone who I didn't really enjoy having sex with. The thought of Jacob creeped into my mind. At that moment, I was missing him. It had been a couple of months since we had that argument, or I would say it was more of a misunderstanding, or maybe it was just me getting lost in my emotions. I couldn't help myself but to think about him and how great our intimacy was and the connection we had. It wasn't as if I was just going to sleep with some handsome man and it was going to be great. There needed to be chemistry between us for it to feel incredible. And that is not something I felt with James. So I'm laying there with all of these thoughts and these feelings. Part of me felt upset. Did he ask if it was okay for us to have sex? I mean, it had been so long for me. It wasn't as if I was allowing just anyone to touch me like that or invade my space. It kind of just happened. Felt like two teenagers with raging hormones. But at this point, I was an adult and I should have had more control over the situation. Part of me didn't feel too happy about it. So throughout the day, I was just hanging out at home. However, I had not heard from him. Evening came and I decided to text him. I didn't know what to say to him, but I felt the need to contact him, even though I had been feeling uncertain earlier that day. So I texted him and I thanked him for an eventful week. And he texted me back about 30 minutes later and said, "No, thank you," with a capital YOU, then mentioned that he had been exhausted all day. I decided to keep that conversation short. So the next day was Monday and it was officially a week since we had matched on the dating app. So during my work break, I was trying to figure out a way to recover my Instagram. I had told one of my girlfriends how I had accidentally deleted my account. And she said to me, "What about all of our meaningful conversations?" So I thought very heavily about this, and I said to myself that I needed to figure out how to recover my Instagram. So during my work break, I'm trying to do research on how to get it back up and going. So I was trying different procedures on how to fix this, and somehow I got it up and running. And once I did, I posted a couple of stories. So I'm looking at the views throughout the day, and I saw that James had viewed a couple of my stories. After work, I had been texting with my sister-in-law. We're having a conversation and she asked me about this new man because before we went on our first date, I had mentioned him to her and was really excited about this man wanting to go on a date with me. So she asked me how it went. I had explained to her how I felt that we were a really good match and we had great conversations and a lot of things in common. I told her how I thought he was sweet and romantic and that we were really attracted to one another. But I felt like there were some things that he needed to work on regarding his previous relationship. And I expressed to her how I felt like that was something he needed to work on before starting to date other people or getting into another relationship. But overall, I felt really good about him. After I had been done talking him up to my sister-in-law, I go on Instagram to take a look at his page just to see his face. And then I noticed that he unfollowed me and removed me from his follow list. And it felt like a really hard jab. So I'm thinking, what the fuck? So I decided to call him. I didn't usually call him. It was always more of a text. So I called and he answered and I said, "What are you doing?" He explained to me how he was heading to dinner with his aunt and uncle. And I said, no. That's not what I'm talking about. I said, "What are you doing? Why did you remove me on Instagram?" And he says, "Well, I thought it was weird that you told me you deleted it and now it's back up. So I don't know what's going on." I explained to him how the deletion was an accident, but I figured out a way to get it back up and running. And so he explained to me how he was heading to dinner and that he would give me a call back once he was done. So I let him go, but I was still bothered by this. I decided to send him a text. I said to him, "You are so punishing. I don't know what you think I did, but I figured out how to recover my account, which is great because I thought I had lost everything, but I don't know what you think I did for you to be so mean to me. I have spent an entire year not letting anyone get too close to me, but you decide to fuck me and then treat me like I'm disposable. It's mean. You really hurt my feelings." I did not want to be mean to him, but I wanted to express to him that I was hurt. But he went on to say how he wasn't understanding how removing social media was mean. Not that he completely removed me, but more so easing the topic, saying that he removed social media, saying that it had just been confusing from the beginning. So I asked him what didn't make sense. And I usually deactivate it frequently to not get distracted. I noticed that through text, he was trying to address all of the things that I was mentioning, so I tried my best to calm down. And I finally said to him, "We don't need to be friends, it's fine." He might have taken that the wrong way because when he texted me back, he responded with, "What? No." So with that, I told him that I just wanted to get the point across that he had hurt my feelings. Shortly after, I decided to text him back and I told him that I didn't think that we should fight about it and that he should just give me a big hug. He told me that he agreed, and at that moment, he was dropping off his aunt and uncle and would call me. So instead of calling me, we were actually texting. I mentioned to him that I would love to see him before I left. So he asked me what time my flight was and mentioned that he would be working the day that I flew out, but could probably see me in the morning. His work schedule fluctuated, but we could figure it out the next day. The next day came and I had not heard from him and he had not texted me. He did mention that he had plans the next day, so I wasn't too worried. I decided to give him a call later in the evening. So I called until his phone went to voicemail, and when I heard his voicemail, I did feel bad about it because he had mentioned that we were going to figure out our schedule and us seeing each other before I left, I really had to calm myself down and think that it wasn't a big deal. He typically was true to his words, so I felt a little bad about him not answering, even though he mentioned how we were going to figure out our schedules. But shortly after, he gave me a call back and he mentioned how he had just gotten back an hour before and he was laying in bed. I wondered, was he really going to call me, contact me, make plans with me? It sounded like he wasn't. I felt like a part of the issue with my social media was still bothering him, so I wanted to address it. Once again, I'm explaining the situation to him, and then he says to me, out of the 12 years that I've had Instagram, I've never had anyone have so much issues with it. It felt like he was scolding me, but I wasn't going to take it to heart because I knew what the situation was. Even if he had not experienced anyone having the issues that I was having, I told him there's a first time for everything. It's not always going to be black and white. It's not always going to be what you assume it's going to be or how you want it. That's just not how it works. Sometimes weird things happen. I didn't feel the need to explain that to him. He should know. It really wasn't that big of a deal, but it definitely seemed like something that bothered him. So we still discussed seeing one another before I left, and he mentioned how we would figure it out. So during this call, he says how it is an issue that I live 40 minutes away and he can't be driving out to my town every single day because he drives a vehicle with low MPG and he just can't be making that drive frequently, saying how seeing me 2 times last week used up a lot of gas. While he's saying this, I'm thinking, so last week you were completely down with seeing me and that gas or that driving wasn't even an issue. But this week, for some reason, it's more of an issue than it was last week. Then he says, would you be willing to drive out here and see me or meet me halfway? Which I actually was. I was open to at least meeting him halfway. I don't even know where the halfway mark would have been. I also didn't want to seem too eager and be like, yes, I would love to drive to your place. So it was getting late and we decided that we would figure out a time and place to meet one another before I left. The next day was the day before I was leaving for my trip, and that morning I did not feel cute at all. My hair felt flat and dry, and I just wanted to look nice before I flew out. So I set up an appointment to get my hair done right after work, and then I realized I had an appointment at the same time. So I had to rebook my hair appointment. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking I can schedule everything out and still be able to see him. However, that's actually not how it played out. So what I had done was I was feeling comfortable with this man. So I ended up sharing my location with him and I told him that I had these appointments, but I was sharing my location and hopefully he can catch me before I leave. So he hearted that message and he actually viewed where I was and saw that I was getting my hair done. I told him that I woke up that morning not feeling cute and he responded with, you always are, so you don't have to worry about that. When I got home, it had been such a long day, so I ended up making myself some dinner. We were exchanging text messages and I was letting him know what I had been up to and I had updated him on my meal. So it wasn't as if he was making an effort to see me that evening because it was getting late and he did live far. It wasn't too much of a big deal for me. The next morning, on the day that I was flying out, he did text me and he wished me safe travels, saying that my trip was going to be a lot of fun. He then asked me if I had finished my dinner, but it was just so much for one person, so I wasn't able to. I told him to have a great day at work and that I'd be in touch. So the time difference from my home to where I was traveling to was about 5 hours, and I was still trying to adjust the time and my sleep schedule, but I ended up texting him the next day, sending him a photo of my view, saying you should be here. He liked that message, but didn't respond, which is fine. At least there was some type of correspondence there. It wasn't a big deal to me. Then the day after that, I sent him a cute video of myself showing my face and sending a message saying, I miss you and I wish you were here. From there, I did not get a response from him. A part of me felt very small. And at that point, I knew something was off between us. Like, why would he just leave me hanging? It wasn't like him to do that. I began reverting back to Jacob. So, as a defense mechanism, I had tried thinking of all of these things I didn't like about him, like how he spoke so much about his ex, the lack of chemistry we had in the bedroom. I just kept telling myself this over and over again, just to not be so consumed by my likeness towards him. That same day, I decided to send Jacob a message. In doing so, just felt right in the moment because I didn't like the way I was feeling from James with his lack of communication. And it seemed like he had been withdrawing from me. I didn't like that feeling. So I decided to send Jacob a message and I said to him, I know we aren't talking, but I just want to let you know that you are the best and you always will be. And that was the truth coming from me. This was in reference to being intimate with him. So I sent that message and I left it at that. I had sent him a couple of messages from the time we had that falling out to this point. With those messages I had sent, he had not responded. With this message, I saw that he had read it and I was completely fine with him just reading it and not responding because I had a feeling of how it would go. The next day, I received a message from him and it said, I appreciate that. About a half an hour after he sends this message, he sends another message and says, I still want you. And I told him, same. Then we start back up with our conversations and we start talking about our intimacy. And I am completely fine with this because I had missed him so much and I had been so sad about not talking to him and him not being in my life. It really affected me. So I was happy to start things back up again, knowing in the back of my mind this would lead to absolutely nothing. Deep down, I missed him, and with the reaction that I was getting from James, it made me miss him even more. So within my conversation with Jacob, I say to him, you always get me excited, but nothing ever happens. And he says, you never ask. So I say, but you know that I always want you. And he replied with, I don't know that. So I told him that I wanted to see him when I got back. And he's like, sure thing. So when I flew home, I really had Jacob on my mind and I was feeling okay. I did have the feeling of being wanted once again, even if it wasn't substantial, because nothing about Jacob was substantial. It was always just words, messages, and memories when it came to Jacob, but I was happy to be communicating with him again. I arrived back home on a Tuesday around noon, and I am just resting in my bed. Then I get a text message a couple hours later from James asking me how my trip was. I was away for 5 days, and I had not heard from him at all during my trip, so I was very surprised that he had texted me. So I asked him if he was leaving on his trip, and he told me that he had already arrived at the same airport that I had been just a few hours earlier. I knew that he was on a work trip. He most likely was also visiting his family. Didn't want to message him while he was away, the same way he didn't message me while I was away. So I left it at that, and I was also, again, trying to distract myself and really think of reasons why I didn't like him to keep myself from not getting hung up on this man, because there was a point where I really liked him and there were things that he was saying and doing that made me attracted to him and want to get to know him better. However, all of those components were really fading away and it did make me sad, but it was just something I needed to deal with. I needed to practice healthy detachment, even if it meant listing all of the reasons I didn't like about him. I was really preparing myself to disengage, and 3 days later, on a Friday, I was at at home minding my business and I get a text message. So I open up the message and I see James sends me this big chunk. In his text. He said he had so much fun getting to know me, but he can't see himself going any further than that. He didn't feel the chemistry or spark to continue dating someone. He also mentioned that he didn't like the feeling of being ghosted or strung along, therefore he didn't want to do that to anyone, and told me that I deserved more than my time being wasted on someone. He also mentioned how he wanted to be intentional in his dating, figuring that's what I wanted as well, hoping that I appreciated his honesty and transparency. So this is not the message that I was expecting from him. Yes, I completely had the feeling that he was drifting away, but listen, you guys, who does this? Nobody does this. Nobody actually makes the effort to be open and honest about how they're truly feeling. However, I messaged him back with a short and sweet response saying that I understood and I thanked him for letting me know. He hearted that message and that was the end of that conversation. After this text exchange, I have to admit that I had so many mixed emotions. I felt a hint of sadness come over me and I definitely had my ego bruised, but I have to admit that I respected the fact that he took the time to communicate to me how he was truly feeling. And in all honesty, if I didn't make him happy, it wasn't my place to keep him from finding someone who makes him truly happy. Although I respected his decision to break things off with me, there were still some things that were bothering me, like the fact that he was in this abusive relationship, decided to go back to it, stayed, broke things off with her, then decided to go and date other people, who in this case was myself, and then pour all of this heavy information on me, break my celibacy, then tell me he felt nothing. It was pretty painful to think about. Our dating time frame had only been 2 weeks, and I don't think that's a lot of time to really get to know someone and be able to form a connection with them. You can't just see if there's feelings circulating within you to know that that's the right person for you. You need to go through challenges, you need to go through ups and downs, you need to see how people react and behave to certain situations, and that is how you know if this person is right for you. A spark and chemistry, those are very important things. And those components are what create the initial attraction. But in the end, time tells all. So that night I was texting with a friend and I mentioned to him how I had just gotten broken up with. And then he said to me, I feel like if people really took the time to get to know you, they would see how funny you are and how great of a person you are. And after he had said this to me, I was sitting in my bed and I began crying. The reason that I was crying is because these words triggered me. Knowing myself, I have the willingness to get to know people and the capability of creating strong connections. However, since I was mixed up in my feelings, I felt as though James had not given me the opportunity to show him who I really am. But in retrospect, I could have been the only person who was holding me back from displaying who I really am as a person. And the reason for this is because I do have deep-rooted trust issues, and it's so difficult for me to open up. What I'm needing from my potential partner is the ability to feel comfortable with them. And from there, I would be able to truly open up. So when you experience rejection, you do tend to question yourself. And this is what I was doing for a brief moment. But allowing myself to grasp the entirety of it, I realized that it wasn't a completely bad situation. We had nice moments, we had happy moments, we laughed together. And those are the things that I'm going to take with me. I absolutely love the time that we spent together, but not everything is going to last forever. And sometimes things don't work out the way you wanted to, but that's okay. And I'm so glad that I still have a positive outlook when it comes to meeting people because it'll get better. It always does.